The grand concert hall buzzed with excitement as hundreds of elegantly dressed people found their seats. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors. Tonight was special. Marcus Chen, the world-famous pianist who had performed for presidents and royalty, was giving a rare public performance in the small city of Riverside. Tickets had sold out within hours and scalpers were selling them for triple the price outside. Sarah Mitchell stood near the back entrance clutching her cleaning supplies. She was part of the evening janitorial staff, hired to clean the restrooms and hallways during the intermission. At 42 years old, Sarah had worked various cleaning jobs for the past 15 years, ever since her husband left her with 2 young children to raise alone. She had never been inside the main concert hall before, always entering through the service doors and staying out of sight. As she pushed her cart down the corridor, she heard the most beautiful music drifting from the hall. Sarah paused, her hand resting on the cart handle. The melody was haunting and tender, making her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. She had always loved music, though she had never learned to play an instrument. Her mother used to hum old songs while cooking dinner, and those memories were among the few happy ones from her childhood. The music stopped, and thunderous applause erupted. Sarah continued her work, wiping down the marble countertops in the women's restroom, emptying trash bins and restocking paper towels. She moved efficiently, knowing she had to finish before intermission ended. Through the walls, she could hear muffled announcements and the excited chatter of the audience. When intermission finally came, the hallways flooded with people in expensive suits and glittering dresses. Sarah kept her head down, trying to be invisible as she worked. She had learned long ago that people like her were meant to blend into the background, to be unseen and unheard. The wealthy patrons talked loudly about the performance, using words Sarah did not fully understand. They spoke of technique and interpretation, of crescendos and diminuendos, as if music were a language only they could speak. Near the refreshment table, she overheard a group discussing Marcus Chen himself. Apparently, he was not just talented but also notoriously arrogant. One woman in a silver gown laughed as she recounted a story about him refusing to shake hands with a fan because the person had sweaty palms. Another man mentioned how Marcus had once walked out of an interview because the journalist mispronounced the name of a composer. Sarah finished cleaning the restroom and began emptying the trash near the main entrance. That was when she saw him. Marcus Chen stood surrounded by admirers, a tall man in his 50s with silver-streaked black hair and sharp, calculating eyes. He wore an immaculate black suit and carried himself with the posture of someone who knew exactly how important he was. People hung on his every word, laughing at his jokes and nodding seriously when he made pronouncements about music. As Sarah bent to retrieve a crumpled napkin from the floor, she accidentally bumped her cart into a decorative plant stand. The crash was not loud, but in that moment it felt deafening. Several heads turned in her direction, including Marcus Chen's. Their eyes met for just a second, and Sarah saw something flash across his face. Contempt, perhaps, or simple annoyance at being disturbed by someone so beneath his notice. She quickly righted the plant stand and hurried away, her face burning with embarrassment. Behind her, she heard laughter and assumed they were laughing at her clumsiness. Sarah ducked into a service corridor and leaned against the cool wall, taking deep breaths. She told herself it did not matter. These people lived in a different world, one she would never be part of. She just needed to finish her shift and go home to her children. But as she stood there in the dimly lit corridor, listening to the distant sound of the audience returning to their seats, Sarah felt something stir inside her. It was not anger exactly, but a deep sadness for all the things she had never been allowed to try, all the dreams she had buried under the weight of survival. She thought about music and beauty and all the experiences that seemed reserved for people with money and education and connections. The second half of the concert was about to begin. Sarah pushed her cart toward the storage room, ready to wait out the rest of the performance before doing her final cleaning sweep. She did not know that in just a few hours her entire life would change in a way she could never have imagined. The concert ended near 10 o'clock. Sarah heard the final round of applause, even more enthusiastic than before, followed by 3 standing ovations. She waited in the storage room, organizing her supplies and checking her phone for messages from her teenage daughter. Everything was fine at home. Her daughter had put her younger brother to bed and finished her homework. Sarah felt grateful for how responsible her children had become. even though she wished they did not have to grow up so fast. When the audience finally dispersed, Sarah emerged to begin her final cleaning. The concert hall looked different now, empty and quiet with programs scattered across seats and the lingering warmth of hundreds of bodies. She worked her way through the rows, picking up trash and straightening chairs. The stage loomed large at the front, the grand piano still sitting center stage under a spotlight. Sarah paused in her work, staring at the instrument. It was massive and gleaming, black as midnight with ivory keys that seemed to glow in the light. She had never been this close to a real grand piano before. The closest she had come to playing any instrument was pressing random keys on an old electronic keyboard at a thrift store once. Years ago, before a salesperson shooed her away. Unable to resist, Sarah walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage. Her footsteps echoed in the empty hall. She knew she should not do this, that she was not supposed to touch anything on stage. But something drew her forward. When she reached the stairs, she hesitated, then climbed up. The stage was larger than she expected, and being on it made her feel exposed even though no one was watching. The piano bench was still in place. Sarah approached it carefully, as if the instrument might bite her. She sat down gently, her cleaning uniform crinkling slightly. The keys were within reach now. She extended one hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and pressed a single key near the middle. The note rang out clear and pure, filling the entire hall with sound. Sarah gasped and pulled her hand back. Behind her, a voice spoke sharply. Marcus Chen had returned to the hall. Sarah did not hear exactly what he said at first. So startled was she by his sudden appearance. She jumped up from the bench, nearly knocking it over, her heart racing with fear of getting fired. Marcus stood in the side entrance to the stage, still in his concert attire. His expression was unreadable. He walked toward her slowly, his shoes clicking on the wooden stage. Sarah wanted to apologize, to explain, but her mouth had gone dry. She managed to stammer something about just cleaning and that she was sorry. He stopped a few feet away, looking at her with those sharp eyes. Then he said something that made her blood run cold. He asked if she thought she could play piano. There was mockery in his tone, a challenge that was clearly not genuine. He gestured toward the bench, telling her to sit down and try. It was obvious he expected her to fail, to embarrass herself, perhaps to provide him with an amusing story to tell at his next dinner party. Sarah felt anger flare up inside her, mixing with the embarrassment. This man, who had everything, was mocking her for daring to touch his precious piano. But beneath the anger was something else, a tiny spark of defiance. Her whole life, people had told her what she could not do, where she did not belong, what she was not smart enough or good enough or worthy enough to attempt. She sat back down on the bench. Marcus raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised she had taken him up on the challenge. He crossed his arms and waited, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah stared at the keys. She had no idea how to play. She had never had a single lesson, never read a note of sheet music, never practiced scales or learned proper hand position. But she had listened. For years she had listened. To the radio while she cleaned houses. To the music playing in stores and restaurants where she worked. To the beautiful melodies that drifted through walls and doors from worlds she could not enter. And somewhere deep in her memory, buried under years of exhaustion and struggle, was a melody her mother used to hum. Sarah placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the song. It came to her slowly at first, just fragments of the tune. Then, haltingly, she began to pick out the notes. One finger at a time, searching for the right sounds, making mistakes and correcting them, she played her mother's lullaby. It was not perfect. It was not even particularly good from a technical standpoint. Her timing was off. She used only one or two fingers and she hit several wrong notes. But something else came through in those simple notes. Something honest and raw and deeply felt. The melody, simple as it was, carried emotion. When she finished, the hall was silent. Sarah opened her eyes and looked down at her hands, afraid to turn around and see Marcus Chen's mocking expression. She waited for the laughter, for the cutting remark that would put her back in her place. But it did not come. Instead, she heard something unexpected. Footsteps approaching, then stopping right behind her. And when Marcus finally spoke, his voice sounded different, quieter, almost curious. Marcus Chen walked around the piano bench and stood where Sarah could see him. His expression had changed. The smirk was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. He asked her where she had learned to play. Sarah told him the truth. She had never learned. She had simply tried to remember a song from her childhood. He stood silent for a long moment, staring at her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Then he did something completely unexpected. He asked her to move over on the bench. Sarah slid to the side, bewildered, as the world-famous pianist sat down beside her. This close, she could smell his expensive cologne and see the fine lines around his eyes. Marcus positioned his hands over the keys and asked her to play the melody again, just the beginning. Sarah hesitated, then slowly picked out the first few notes. He listened carefully, then joined in, adding harmony beneath her simple melody. The sound was transformed. What had been a basic tune became something rich and full, the kind of music Sarah had only heard in recordings. They played together for perhaps 30 seconds before Sarah's fingers fumbled and stopped. But Marcus kept going, developing the melody, taking it in directions she could never have imagined. His hands moved with impossible speed and grace, pulling emotions from the instrument that seemed to come from somewhere beyond technique, beyond practice, from some deep well of human feeling. When he finished, the hall seemed to hum with the fading resonance. Sarah realized she was crying. She could not remember the last time she had cried in front of another person. She wiped her eyes quickly, apologizing. Marcus said nothing for a moment, then asked a question that surprised her even more. He asked if she wanted to learn. Sarah laughed, a bitter sound. She told him about her life. 2 jobs to pay rent, 2 children to feed and clothe. No money for luxuries like music lessons. No time for hobbies or dreams. She explained that people like her did not get to learn piano. They got to clean the halls where other people played. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked a simpler question. Did she want to learn? Not could she afford it, not did she have time, just whether she wanted to. Sarah found herself nodding before she could think better of it. Yes, she wanted to learn more than almost anything. He stood up and pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. He told her to come to the conservatory where he taught 3 times a week. He would give her lessons himself, free of charge. Sarah stared at the card like it might disappear. She asked why he would do this. Marcus looked away, his expression becoming distant. He told her about his own childhood. He had grown up wealthy, his parents both successful doctors. They had pushed him into music not because he loved it, but because they wanted a prodigy for a son, someone they could show off at parties. He had learned to play with the finest teachers in the best schools, with every advantage money could provide. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten why music mattered. It had become about perfection, about impressing others, about maintaining his reputation. When Sarah played her mother's lullaby, Marcus said, she had reminded him of something he had lost. She played with pure feeling, without ego or pretension, without concern for what anyone thought. She played because the music meant something to her. He had not heard anyone play like that in decades, possibly ever. It was technically terrible, he admitted with a slight smile, but it was honest. And honesty, he said, was rarer than technical skill. Sarah did not know what to say. The card felt heavy in her hand, weighted with possibility and fear. She thought about her schedule, about her children, about all the practical reasons this was impossible. But she also thought about how she felt when her fingers touched those keys, when the notes rang out in response to her touch. She thought about dreams deferred and doors that had always been closed. She asked if he was serious. Marcus met her eyes and nodded. He said he would be at the conservatory tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. If she came, he would teach her. If she did not, he would understand. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Sarah alone on the stage with a business card and a decision that felt far bigger than just piano lessons. Sarah finished her cleaning in a daze. She kept pulling out the card to make sure it was real, that she had not imagined the entire encounter. By the time she clocked out and drove home in her old car, it was nearly midnight. Her daughter was still awake, reading in bed. Sarah sat on the edge of the mattress and told her everything that had happened. Her daughter's eyes grew wide with excitement. She urged her mother to go, to take the lessons, to try something for herself for once. But Sarah worried about time away from work, about imposing on Marcus Chen, about failing and looking foolish. Her daughter took her mother's hands and said something that made Sarah start crying again. She said that all her life, she had watched her mother sacrifice everything for her and her brother. Maybe it was time for her mother to have something just for herself. That night, Sarah barely slept. She kept thinking about the piano, about the feel of the keys, about the possibility of learning to create real music. She thought about all the reasons she should not go and the one reason she should. Because she wanted to. Because for once in her life she wanted to do something simply because it would bring her joy. The next afternoon, Sarah stood outside the Riverside Conservatory of Music, her stomach twisted with nerves. The building was beautiful and intimidating, all tall windows and marble columns. Students streamed in and out, carrying instrument cases and talking about rehearsals and recitals. Everyone seemed young and confident, dressed in expensive casual clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's entire wardrobe. She almost turned around 3 times. She did not belong here. This was a mistake. Marcus Chen had probably forgotten all about his impulsive offer. But each time she started to leave, she remembered how it felt to touch those piano keys, and she forced herself to stay. Finally, she walked through the front doors. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. A grand staircase curved upward, and the walls were lined with portraits of famous musicians. Sarah asked the receptionist about Marcus Chen, expecting to be turned away. Instead, the woman smiled and directed her to room 301 on the 3rd floor. The walk up those stairs felt like climbing a mountain. Sarah's hands were sweating and her heart raced. She found room 301 and knocked softly. A voice called for her to enter. She pushed open the door and stepped into a large practice room. A beautiful grand piano sat in the center, surrounded by chairs and music stands. And there, standing by the window, was Marcus Chen. He turned when she entered, and a genuine smile crossed his face. He said he was glad she came, that he was afraid she might not. Sarah stood awkwardly near the door until he gestured for her to sit at the piano. She explained that she had only an hour before she needed to get to her second job. Marcus nodded and said they would make the most of it. He started with the absolute basics: how to sit properly, how to position her hands, how to curve her fingers. Everything Sarah had done instinctively the night before was wrong from a technical standpoint, but Marcus was patient and kind. He showed her the names of the notes, explained the layout of the keyboard, and taught her a simple 5-finger exercise. It was harder than Sarah expected. Her fingers felt clumsy and uncoordinated. She kept hitting the wrong keys or using too much pressure. But Marcus never lost patience. He would demonstrate, then watch her try, then gently correct her hand position or suggest a different approach. He spoke to her the way a good teacher speaks to any student, with respect and attention. Before Sarah knew it, an hour had passed. She had learned the names of the white keys and could play a simple scale, albeit slowly and with mistakes. Marcus wrote out some basic exercises for her to practice if she could find time. He said if she could come 3 times a week, she would progress quickly. Adults learn differently than children, he explained. They understood concepts better, even if their fingers were less flexible. Sarah thanked him and turned to leave. As she reached the door, Marcus called her name. When she looked back, he was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He said something that surprised her. He said teaching her reminded him why he had started playing piano in the first place, decades ago, before the pressure and expectations and performances. He thanked her for that. Over the following weeks, Sarah's life developed a new rhythm. She would finish her morning cleaning shift, rush to the conservatory for her lesson, then head to her evening restaurant job. Her children helped by taking on more responsibilities at home. Her daughter learned to cook simple meals, and her son kept the apartment tidy. They could see how happy the lessons made their mother, and they wanted to support her. Sarah practiced whenever she could find 10 or 15 minutes. She used an old keyboard she found at a yard sale for $20. The keys stuck sometimes and the sound was tinny, but it allowed her to practice at home. She would play scales while dinner cooked, run through exercises during commercial breaks, and review pieces late at night after her children were asleep. The progress was slow but steady. Her fingers grew stronger and more coordinated. The notes that had seemed impossible to reach became manageable. Pieces that had looked incomprehensible on the page began to make sense. Marcus pushed her to improve but never made her feel inadequate. He celebrated small victories and treated setbacks as learning opportunities. Other students at the conservatory noticed the unusual pair. A famous concert pianist teaching an older woman who worked as a janitor was certainly unusual. Some whispered and speculated. A few made unkind comments that Sarah overheard. But Marcus seemed oblivious to the gossip, or perhaps he simply did not care. He treated Sarah's lessons with the same seriousness he brought to his master classes with advanced students. One afternoon, about 2 months into her lessons, Marcus introduced Sarah to another piece. It was a simple arrangement of Beethoven's Ode to Joy. She recognized the melody immediately. Everyone knew that tune, but seeing it written out on the page, knowing she would learn to play it herself, made her emotional. This was real music, not just exercises and scales. This was something beautiful. She worked on that piece for 3 weeks, practicing until her fingers ached, until she could hear the notes in her sleep. There were days she wanted to give up, when the difficult passages seemed impossible, when she felt stupid for trying to learn something so far beyond her abilities. But Marcus kept encouraging her, breaking down the difficult parts, helping her understand the patterns and logic beneath the notes. Finally, she played it all the way through without stopping. It was not perfect. There were hesitations and a few wrong notes, but it was recognizable, musical, and complete. When she finished, Sarah looked up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. He was smiling, really smiling, and he started to applaud. The sound echoed in the practice room, and Sarah felt something she had not felt in years. Pride. Real, honest pride in something she had accomplished. As winter turned to spring, Sarah's skills continued to improve. She had been taking lessons for nearly 5 months, and the changes were remarkable. Her playing had developed real musicality. She could read simple sheet music, understand basic musical terms, and play a repertoire of pieces that included classical arrangements, folk songs, and even a few contemporary pieces Marcus thought she would enjoy. But more than her technical skills had changed. Sarah carried herself differently now. She stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and smiled more often. Her children noticed it. Her co-workers noticed it. Even she noticed it when she caught her reflection in mirrors. Learning piano had given her something she did not realize she was missing. A sense that she was worth investing in. That she could learn and grow and become more than she had been. Marcus had changed too, though he would have denied it if anyone asked. Teaching Sarah had rekindled something in him. He found himself approaching his concert performances differently, focusing less on perfect technique and more on emotional connection with the music. Reviews noted the change, praising the newfound warmth and depth in his playing. He knew exactly where it came from. One day, Marcus proposed something unexpected. The conservatory held a student recital every spring, where students at all levels performed for an audience of family and friends. He wanted Sarah to participate. She immediately refused. The idea of performing in front of people terrified her. She was still just a beginner, she protested, and everyone else would be real students, young people who had been training for years. Marcus listened to her objections, then asked a simple question. Was she afraid of failure, or was she afraid of success? Sarah did not understand. He explained that many people fear failure, but some people fear success even more. They fear standing out, being noticed, being judged. They fear what it means to claim space in the world, to say that they matter, that their voice deserves to be heard. His words struck deep. Sarah realized he was right. She had spent most of her life trying to be invisible, to take up as little space as possible to avoid drawing attention. The idea of standing on a stage and saying through her performance that she was worth listening to terrified her in a way that had nothing to do with hitting wrong notes. She told Marcus she would think about it. That night she talked to her children. Her daughter was excited, urging her to do it. Her son, quieter and more thoughtful, said something wise beyond his years. He said he wanted to hear her play because she always talked about music with such happiness, and he wanted to see that happiness on stage. How could Sarah refuse after that? She agreed to participate. Marcus helped her select a piece, something challenging enough to show her progress, but not so difficult that she would struggle. They settled on a simple but beautiful arrangement of canon in D. Sarah loved the piece's flowing melody and gentle harmonies. It reminded her of water flowing over stones, constant and peaceful. The weeks leading up to the recital were intense. Sarah practiced more than ever, sometimes staying at the conservatory to use one of the practice rooms after her lesson. Marcus worked with her on performance technique, how to walk on stage, how to bow, how to handle nerves. He told her that everyone gets nervous, even famous soloists. The key was not to eliminate nervousness, but to channel it into focus. The night before the recital, Sarah could barely eat. Her stomach was in knots. She kept running through the piece in her mind, worried she would forget everything the moment she sat at the piano. Her daughter made her chamomile tea and told her funny stories to distract her. Her son gave her a handmade card with a drawing of a piano and the words, "You're going to be great, Mom." The recital was held on a Saturday afternoon in the conservatory's small recital hall. It seated about 200 people. Sarah arrived early, wearing a simple black dress her daughter had helped her pick out at a discount store. Other students were warming up backstage, most of them teenagers or young adults. Sarah felt conspicuously older, out of place among these young musicians who had been studying for years. Marcus found her backstage looking pale and shaky. He took her to a quiet practice room and had her play through the piece once. Her fingers were cold and stiff at first, but they loosened up as she played. When she finished, Marcus told her she was ready. He reminded her that the performance was not about being perfect. It was about sharing something beautiful with the audience, about connecting with them through music. Sarah's turn came in the middle of the program. She heard her name announced. Sarah Mitchell, performing Canon in D, arranged by Pachelbel. She walked onto the stage on legs that felt like they might give out. The audience was a blur of faces. She found her children in the third row, both sitting forward with encouraging smiles. Next to them, she was surprised to see several of her co-workers from the concert hall who had heard about her performance. She sat at the piano bench and adjusted it slightly, just as Marcus had taught her. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. For a moment, her mind went blank. She could not remember how the piece started. Panic rose in her chest. Then she heard Marcus's voice in her head. "Don't think. Feel." She closed her eyes, and the first notes came to her fingers. The piece began quietly, the simple melody emerging like dawn breaking. Sarah's nervousness faded as she lost herself in the music. She hit one wrong note in the middle section but recovered smoothly, just as she had practiced. The harmonies flowed together, building gently toward the conclusion. When she played the final notes and the sound faded away, there was a brief moment of silence. Then the applause began. Sarah opened her eyes, stunned by how loud it was. People were smiling. Her children were on their feet, clapping enthusiastically. Even the other students backstage were applauding. She stood and bowed, somewhat awkwardly, then walked off stage feeling like she was floating. After the recital, Sarah was surrounded by well-wishers. Her children hugged her tightly, telling her how proud they were. Her co-workers congratulated her, amazed at what she had accomplished in just a few months. But the most meaningful moment came when Marcus approached. He did not say anything at first, just looked at her with an expression of genuine respect and pride. Then he shook her hand formally and said 4 words. "You are a pianist." Those words meant more to Sarah than any amount of applause. To be recognized by someone like Marcus Chen, to be called a pianist rather than someone who was learning piano, felt like receiving an official acknowledgement of her worth. She had not just learned to play an instrument. She had claimed a new identity, one that existed alongside but separate from being a mother, a worker, a survivor. In the weeks following the recital, word spread about Sarah's performance. A local newspaper ran a small story about the unlikely student and her famous teacher. The headline read, "Janitor Becomes Pianist, a story of perseverance and unexpected talent." Sarah felt embarrassed by the attention, but Marcus encouraged her to do the interview. He said her story could inspire others who thought it was too late to pursue their dreams. The article attracted more attention than either of them expected. Sarah received messages from people across the city, sharing their own abandoned dreams and asking how she found the courage to start learning so late in life. Some were musicians who had given up their instruments decades ago. Others were people who had always wanted to learn something new, but felt too old or too busy or too afraid. Marcus was approached by the conservatory administration with an interesting proposal. They wanted to create a program for adult learners, people who had never had the opportunity to study music when they were young. They asked if he would be willing to teach a small group class in addition to his regular duties. Marcus agreed on one condition. Sarah would be his assistant instructor, helping to encourage and support the other students. Sarah was shocked by the suggestion. She had only been playing for 6 months. How could she possibly teach others? But Marcus explained that teaching was not just about technical expertise. It was about understanding the struggles beginners face, about offering encouragement and perspective. Sarah knew better than anyone what it felt like to start something new as an adult, to battle self-doubt and practical obstacles. That experience was valuable. The Adult Learner program launched that fall. 8 students enrolled, ranging in age from 35 to 72. They were teachers, nurses, accountants, retirees, all people who had dreamed of making music but never had the chance. Sarah helped them with basic techniques and exercises, but more importantly, she offered understanding and support. When they struggled, she shared her own struggles. When they wanted to quit, she reminded them why they started. Sarah continued her own lessons with Marcus and continued to progress. By her 1-year anniversary of that fateful night at the concert hall, she was working on intermediate pieces by Chopin and Debussy. Her sight reading had improved dramatically, and she had developed a sense of musical interpretation that Marcus found remarkable. She played with a maturity and emotional depth that came not from technical training, but from life experience. The relationship between Sarah and Marcus had evolved into genuine friendship. They talked not just about music, but about life, about their pasts, about their hopes. Marcus confided that teaching Sarah had changed his perspective on success. He had spent his career chasing perfection, trying to prove his worth through flawless performances and critical acclaim. But watching Sarah's joy in learning, her celebration of small victories, reminded him that music's value was not in perfection but in connection, expression, and personal growth. Sarah shared her own realizations. She told Marcus that learning piano had taught her that she was capable of more than survival. For years, she had defined herself by her circumstances: single mother, low-wage worker, someone life happened to rather than someone who actively shaped her life. Piano had shown her that she could set goals and achieve them, that she could learn and improve, that she had value beyond her utility to others. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Marcus organized a small celebration at the conservatory. He invited Sarah's children, the adult learner students, and several faculty members. He presented Sarah with a gift, a used upright piano for her apartment. It was not expensive or fancy, but it was a real acoustic piano with a warm tone and responsive keys. Sarah cried when she saw it, overwhelmed by the generosity. But Marcus said it was not just generosity. It was gratitude. He told the assembled group the full story of how they met, including his initial mockery and cruel intentions. He admitted he had expected Sarah to embarrass herself, that he had been arrogant enough to think her playing would entertain him. Instead, she had taught him what he had forgotten, that music was not about impressing others, but about honest expression and emotional truth. Sarah hugged him, something she had never done before. She thanked him not just for the lessons or the piano, but for seeing potential in her when she could not see it in herself. She thanked him for treating her with respect, for taking her seriously when most people looked through her as if she were invisible. She thanked him for giving her back a part of herself she did not know was missing. 2 years after that night in the concert hall, Sarah's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. She still worked cleaning jobs, but she had cut back to one full-time position that offered better pay and benefits. Her children were thriving, her daughter preparing for college and her son excelling in school. And Sarah played piano every day, her upright instrument a central feature of their small apartment. She had become an integral part of the conservatory's adult program, which had expanded to include 20 students. Sarah taught beginner classes twice a week, sharing not just piano techniques but life lessons about perseverance, self-worth, and the courage to try new things. Her students loved her because she understood their fears and frustrations in ways that teachers who had been studying music since childhood could not. Marcus continued to be her mentor and friend. She still took weekly lessons with him, now working on advanced pieces that challenged her growing skills. She had performed in 2 more recitals, each time with greater confidence and polish. Her playing would never reach professional levels, and she had no desire for it to. She played for the joy of it, for the beauty she could create, for the connection she felt to something larger than herself. One evening, the conservatory hosted a special event, a joint concert featuring Marcus Chen performing a classical program, followed by the adult learner students performing shorter pieces. Sarah was scheduled to play a Chopin nocturne, one of the most beautiful pieces she had learned. She was nervous but excited, no longer paralyzed by the fear of judgment. Before the concert, Marcus found her warming up in a practice room. He looked uncharacteristically emotional. He told her that this concert, sharing the stage with students like her, meant more to him than any of the prestigious performances he had given around the world. Those concerts were about his ego, his reputation, his career. This concert was about music's real purpose, transformation, connection, and shared humanity. The concert was held in the same hall where Sarah had first heard Marcus play 2 years earlier. As she sat backstage waiting for her turn, she thought about how much had changed. The last time she was in this building, she had been invisible, someone people looked through or past. Tonight, she would walk onto that stage not as a curiosity or an oddity, but as a pianist with something to share. Marcus's performance was breathtaking, as always. He played Rachmaninoff and Liszt with technical brilliance and emotional depth. The audience gave him multiple standing ovations. But when he finished his set, he did something unexpected. Instead of leaving the stage, he spoke to the audience. He told them about the Adult Learner Program and what it meant to him. He told them about second chances and the courage it takes to begin something new. Then he told Sarah's story. Not all of it, but enough. He described meeting a woman who touched piano keys for the first time with such reverence and honesty that it reminded him why music mattered. He talked about her dedication, her progress, and the joy she brought to learning. He said teaching her had saved his career by reminding him what he had forgotten. And then he invited her to the stage. Sarah walked out to thunderous applause. She could not see individual faces through the stage lights, but she could feel the energy of the audience, warm and welcoming. She sat at the piano, the same instrument Marcus had played minutes before, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she thought about that night 2 years ago when Marcus had mocked her, when she had felt so small and insignificant. She thought about all the hours of practice, the frustrations and victories, the ways music had opened up new possibilities in her life. Then she began to play. The Chopin Nocturne flowed from her fingers like water, each phrase shaped with care and feeling. It was not perfect. There were small hesitations and moments where her technique showed its limitations, but the music was beautiful because it was honest, because it came from a place of genuine love and gratitude. Sarah poured everything into that performance, her struggles and triumphs, her pain and hope, her journey from invisibility to recognition. When the final notes faded away, the silence lasted a heartbeat longer than usual. Then the applause began, and it was deafening. People rose to their feet, and the ovation continued for what felt like forever. Sarah stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She looked to the side of the stage where Marcus stood in the wings, and he was crying too, clapping harder than anyone. After the concert, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her and hear her story. Other adult learners from the program performed after her, each one receiving encouragement and applause. It was not a competition or a showcase of technical brilliance. It was a celebration of courage, of people who had decided it was never too late to try something new, to pursue a dream, to claim space in the world. Late that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the hall had emptied, Sarah found Marcus sitting alone at the piano on the dark stage. She sat beside him on the bench just as they had that first night. Neither spoke for a while. Then Marcus played a few notes, the beginning of the lullaby Sarah had played 2 years ago. She joined in, and together they created something beautiful in the darkness. When they finished, Marcus turned to her and said something she would never forget. He said that in all his years of music, all his training and performances and accolades, teaching her had been the most meaningful thing he had ever done. Not because she was the most talented student, but because she had reminded him that music was not about perfection or prestige. It was about connection, transformation, and the courage to be vulnerable. Sarah thanked him for everything he had given her. Not just the lessons or opportunities, but the gift of believing in herself. She said that learning piano had taught her that she was more than her circumstances, more than her job or her struggles. She was someone who could create beauty, who could learn and grow, who had value simply because she existed. As they sat together in that dark hall, the piano silent now, both of them understood something profound. Their chance meeting had changed both of their lives. Marcus had rediscovered the meaning and joy in his music. Sarah had discovered capabilities and worth she never knew she possessed. Sometimes the most important moments in life come disguised as accidents or jokes or random encounters. What matters is being brave enough to see the possibilities and walk through doors that others say are closed. Sarah left the concert hall that night, knowing she would return the next day for her lesson, and the day after that for her teaching. Music had become not just a hobby, but a fundamental part of her identity. She was a mother, a worker, a survivor, and now undeniably a pianist. And that was just the beginning of understanding everything she could become.